part, which let's see if I can do it in 11 minutes, building the wrong thing faster. One of the quotes in the Measure What Matters book that I really liked was this: if the ladder is not leaning against the right wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place faster. And that very strongly connects to the metrics, right? Like if my team is following the metrics that I set on the OKR blindly, what's going to happen is that they might end up going really, really fast in the wrong direction. They build exactly what I told them to build, right? Even though I'm talking about goals rather than methods, they're still going to build exactly what I told them to. And that's where I want to say a few words about handling measurements with care. And for that, we're going to go into a quote war. So the first quote: if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. I'm sure there's people here who have heard this quote. I'm sure there are people who have used it. I have definitely used it. Peter Drucker is I think he was an economist, very influential. Alongside it, I have another quote: it's wrong to think that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, a costly myth. Now, granted, these aren't using exactly the same words, but my take is that they do actually fall on slightly different sides of this argument, right? And Deming, again, I've quoted him before. He was an engineer who became basically a specialist in human systems, in understanding how to build a system around people. And his writing isn't always the easiest to consume, but I highly recommend. And I've quoted him before, I'll quote him again. Now, I want to point something out about the top one, because I've definitely used this one, and I vary between the two quite often. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. I have a question for the people in the room. Have you ever been in love? Oh, come on, there you go. Have you ever been able to make it better or worse? I definitely have. And that's not measurable, right? So, or I don't know how to measure love. So I think that there's possibly I'm not entirely sure I agree with that first one, but I can also see the problem with the second one, and that's where we come to another quote. Tom Gill, I think he was also an economist, very influential in like the 80s, 90s. And he said, anything you need to quantify can be measured in some way that is superior to not measuring it at all. He basically said, yeah, measurements they could be wrong, they could be bad, but just the act of having it is still better than not having it at all. The kind of example that he would give is you want to release a feature and you set some kind of metric about user satisfaction, right? How can we measure how happy users are with the feature? So that's the kind of thing that's really difficult to actually measure in a reliable way. So he would say, even just the act of doing some user testing and then having every person who took part in the user testing fill out a form where they give you between 0 and 5 stars for the new feature, that is already a useful metric, even if it's not necessarily, representative of all users or something that I should necessarily make huge decisions on. It's still more valuable than not having it at all. Alongside that, you have Thomas Johnson, who I was reading about him yesterday, and I've already forgotten all the details. I think he also was an economist. Economists think a lot about this stuff, which is great. So he said, perhaps what you measure is what you get. More likely, what you measure is all you'll get. What you don't or can't measure is lost. And what he was talking about is basically this. If we have certain things about our team that we know we want to measure, right? It's something that, that we know is important, right? For example, our software is high quality. That's often really difficult to actually measure. I can think of a lot of creative ways to measure it, but they're all flawed in some way or another. They're metrics that can easily be gamed or just really, really costly to measure. What the point that he tries to make is, well, if you have OKRs and your key results have metrics and you're striving to achieve those metrics, and that's your entire focus, there are going to be things that aren't represented by your OKRs because you couldn't attach a metric to them. And you're for the people on your team, they're going to infer from that metric, that achieving that thing isn't as important. And the only reason that you don't have it on your OKRs isn't because it's not important, it's because you didn't know how to measure it. And so there's always a danger in that when we give people a certain target to achieve, there will be things that they inherently don't do, even though they're as important. And the only reason they don't do them is because we couldn't figure out how to attach a measurement to them. And that connects to Goodhart's law, which is So the actual law goes, any observed statistical regularity will tend to collapse once pressure is placed upon it for control purposes. I don't understand that. If anyone else understands it, great. I don't. The paraphrase. Go on, Robert.
It's the idea that once you make something like a key performance target, people and organizational units just start to take that thing into account. So something that has previously not necessarily been biased by like reward feedback cycles, and might have in the past served as a useful proxy for something, stops becoming like less. The chance is high that it's becoming a, like say GitHub commit numbers. You measure encoder performance by that. I'm going to make really small commits, right?
Yeah. You should have spoken up earlier. It would have been Monferra's law rather than Goodhart's, because you phrased
It's
better. Yeah, so that's exactly it. And the paraphrase that I find easier than the official definition is that second sentence, which is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, which is basically what you were saying, right? So yeah, your example is perfect. It's very similar to the one that I used, which is basically my team, they estimate the size of work, right? And they'll estimate it between small, medium, large. If I tell them your goal is to deliver more large issues in the next iteration, then I can assure you what will happen is there'll be an inflation of estimates, and suddenly all these issues that used to be small and medium become large, right? We'll achieve the metric, but will we achieve actually something valuable? And so people who are like adherents of Goodhart's law will generally tell you, don't do any measurements at all. Because they're pointless for this kind of thing. And I'm sure Mark is laughing internally because he saw me having an argument on Twitter with someone about this like last week. But anyway, I don't have a concrete point that I want to make here other than measurements are dangerous, and how you use them is really, really, really important. And we're very fallible. We can very easily choose a metric that is going to be easily gamed and is probably the wrong metric for what we're trying to achieve. This blog post was sent to me in the Twitter thread that I mentioned earlier, was sent to me by someone on that Twitter thread to prove to me why I'm wrong about my support of using KPIs for certain things. And I read it and I'm like, this says exactly what I'm saying. So maybe I haven't communicated myself well on this Twitter thread. But basically, I thought I'd share it with you all while I have your attention, because this is actually a really good blog post on why it's dangerous to use measurements and why when you use them for your OKRs, you need to be very careful. But it doesn't tell you not to do that. It just tells you, learn the potential failure cases, read these quotes and understand them, because whatever measurement you choose could, in theory, fall apart. And this is where I quote Measure What Matters again. Remember that an OKR can be modified or even scrapped at any point in its cycle. Sometimes the right key result surfaces weeks or months after a goal is put into play. OKRs are inherently works in progress and not commandments chiseled in stone. So my entire point really to this talk was about this. We in leadership have been pushing the teams to produce OKRs, adopt OKRs, and start following them. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to achieve aligned autonomy. But our OKRs are fallible. We as humans are fallible. We might get them wrong. And it's really, really, really important that the members of our teams don't just follow these OKRs blindly. As you're looking at the key results that we've set and the measurements around them, like ask tough questions. If you think that your team lead or your area lead or the developer on the team that set that key result might have got it wrong, say something, because hey, we probably have. We make mistakes all the time. So, and OKRs are not set in stone. We can change them, we can adapt them. As we learn new things, we will. Like I said, from the example, from our first key result and our first objective, we intend on changing it. We have a plan to change it once we get better data. For example, exactly for the failure case that Camillo pointed out, right? And this, I just wanted to slip this in, so I'm glad that I still have a couple of minutes. This is my favorite example of how metrics can go wrong. While playing Roller Coaster Tycoon one time, I remember that I was tasked with the mission of getting a higher approval rating than the park next door. Rather than make my park better, I instead built a roller coaster that launched people at 100 miles per hour into my rival's park. Since technically those people died in my rival's park, their approval rating would plummet and people would rush to my park straight onto my death coaster, which only caused my ratings to drop, their ratings to drop lower and lower. I did this for an hour until the game said I'd won. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I can never be given any modicum of power ever. Basically, the metric was wrong. The system was gamed by the user, and we might do this to ourselves. So we need to be very careful. Takeaways. Again, I talked about this last time. We strive for aligned autonomy, and I tried to explain why. In order to achieve aligned autonomy, we push the decisions and the ownership down to the edges as far as we can. Achieving that is only possible if leadership gets its control issues in line. I don't need to control everything, right? And it only works if we make sure that the edges, in air quote, have enough clarity and enough competence to achieve this. And I want to make one really important comment. Whenever I use the term competence, people automatically connect it in their head to incompetence. Lacking competence in something does not make you incompetent. It just means that you're not perfect. There's still room to grow and things to achieve, and you can go from being here to here. It doesn't mean that you're incompetent. So I'm always looking for ways to improve the competence of myself and my ability as an engineering manager. It doesn't mean that I'm an incompetent engineering manager for still having places to improve competence. And in order to achieve both leadership giving up its, dealing with its control issues, and making sure that the team has the clarity and competence that they need, we use the OKRs as goals rather than methods. And we ask that the members of the teams constantly question those OKRs and the measurements behind the key results. Bang on time.